In 1943, while the world's eyes were fixed on battlefields across Europe and the Pacific, 3 million people vanished from the earth. Not in gas chambers, not from bombs. They starved to death in plain sight in one of the richest agricultural regions on the planet. This is the story of the Bengal famine, a catastrophe manufactured by policy, enabled by indifference, and sealed by the silence of one man, Winston Churchill, the very leader the world celebrated as democracy's savior. How does a hero become a villain? How does silence become a weapon more deadly than any bomb? Tonight, we uncover the dark truth behind Britain's wartime glory. Bengal, the breadbasket of British India. By 1942, this region produced enough rice to feed its 60 million inhabitants and export surplus across the empire. But Bengal was more than farmland. It was the industrial heart of British India, jute mills, factories, ports. When World War II erupted, Bengal became Britain's strategic fortress against Japanese expansion in Asia. In early 1942, Japan invaded Burma, cutting off rice imports that Bengal had grown dependent on. The threat was real, but what happened next wasn't inevitable. It was orchestrated. On January 16, 1942, the British War Cabinet implemented the denial policy, a scorched earth strategy designed to prevent Japanese forces from accessing Bengali resources if they invaded. Under the denial policy, authorities seized or destroyed over 66,000 boats across coastal Bengal. Fishermen who had fed their communities for generations watched their livelihoods burned or taken away. But boats weren't just for fishing. They were Bengal's transportation system, the way rice moved from field to market, the way families fled disasters. In a land crisscrossed by rivers, removing boats was like removing roads. Next came the grain seizures. Under the guise of wartime necessity, colonial authorities confiscated rice stocks from villages across Bengal, supposedly to deny them to the enemy. The reality, most of this grain was diverted to feed British troops and stockpile reserves in Ceylon and elsewhere, far from the front lines. By late 1942, panic spread. Markets emptied. Prices soared. Rice that cost 5 rupees per mound in January cost 40 rupees by October. Ordinary Bengalis couldn't afford to eat. Villages became death traps. With no boats to fish, no rice to buy, and no means to flee, rural Bengalis began the slow march towards cities, desperately searching for food. What they found was horror beyond imagination. By March 1943, Calcutta had become an open-air morgue. Every morning, municipal workers collected corpses from the pavements, sometimes hundreds in a single day. Photographer Sunil Janna documented the nightmare. Mothers too weak to cry, clutching babies who had already died. Families huddled against colonial buildings, waiting for death beneath symbols of British civilization. These streets still exist. Millions walk them daily, but the ghosts remain invisible, the memory deliberately erased from official British histories. A survivor named Gobinda Chandra recalled, "We ate grass, we ate leaves, we ate anything we could find. When there was nothing left, families made a terrible choice. Who would live? Who would die?" Entire villages disappeared, not destroyed by bombs or soldiers, but by starvation, a violence so complete it left no ruins, only silence. 3,000 miles away, in London, Winston Churchill sat at the center of the British war machine. Reports from India flooded his desk, governors pleading for relief, administrators warning of catastrophic death tolls. His response? Contempt. When Secretary of State for India Leo Amery raised the crisis repeatedly in cabinet meetings, Churchill reportedly asked, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" He blamed Indians for breeding like rabbits. This was the same man who inspired Britain with speeches about never surrendering, about fighting tyranny. But when Indians were dying by the thousands daily, Churchill's eloquence vanished. Bengal's governor Richard K.C. and India's viceroy Archibald Wavell both urgently requested grain shipments. Australia offered wheat. Churchill refused. Ships that could have carried food to Bengal were diverted to build stockpiles in Europe for post-war reserves. Between January and July 1943, over 70,000 tons of grain left India for storage in the Mediterranean, enough to feed millions of Bengalis. Meanwhile, British authorities continued exporting rice from other parts of India, even as Bengal starved. Leo Amory wrote in his diary, "I didn't see much difference between Churchill's attitude and Hitler's." Those words, written by a member of Churchill's own government, revealed the moral abyss that silence created. Starvation is not quick. It is a methodical destroyer. First, the body consumes fat reserves, then muscle tissue. Within weeks, the immune system collapses. Diseases that would normally be minor, dysentery, malaria, cholera, become death sentences. Children suffered most horrifically. Their bodies, still developing, shut down faster. Kwashiorkor, protein deficiency, caused their bellies to swell, while their limbs withered to bone. Dr. Adabinda Samanta, who worked in Bengal during the famine, documented the process. By the time families reached hospitals, we could offer nothing but a place to die. No medicine could reverse months of starvation. We watched them fade, one by one. The official death toll, 3 million, but scholars believe the true number may have reached 4 million or more. The dying continued long after the famine officially ended, from disease, weakness, and the collapse of social structures. Most victims have no graves, no memorials. They vanished into mass burial pits or were cremated in hurried ceremonies. History barely remembers their names. Even as millions died, the British colonial government censored the press. Newspapers were forbidden from publishing photographs of corpses or using the word famine. Journalists who defied the ban faced prosecution. Britain was crafting a narrative of heroic wartime sacrifice. Dead Indians didn't fit the story, so they were erased, their suffering deemed classified. To this day, most British schoolchildren learn nothing about the Bengal famine. Churchill remains an unqualified national hero. His statue stands outside Parliament, his legacy protected by selective memory. Historian Madhushri Mukherjee, who spent years researching Churchill's role, discovered that he actively obstructed relief efforts. In November 1943, when cabinet members finally allocated ships for food aid, Churchill delayed their departure, arguing the war effort took precedence. The ships arrived in late 1943 and early 1944, too late for millions. The relief that could have prevented the catastrophe became a burial service. Was this genocide? The legal definition requires intent to destroy a population. Churchill didn't order executions, but he created the conditions for mass death and then prevented rescue. Scholar Gideon Polya argues that Churchill's policies constituted passive genocide, the deliberate infliction of life-threatening conditions. Others call it criminal negligence on a civilizational scale. History judges atrocities differently based on who commits them. The Holocaust, rightly, is seared into global consciousness. The Bengal famine remains a footnote, its victims denied even the dignity of remembrance. Churchill's racism wasn't hidden. He openly called Indians a beastly people with a beastly religion. When asked about the famine, he suggested that Indians had only themselves to blame for breeding like rabbits. These are his recorded words. This is the uncomfortable truth. The leader who fought fascism abroad embraced racial hierarchy at home. His silence on Bengal wasn't passive, it was policy. Today, Bengal thrives, but the famine's wounds run deep.
Families still carry stories passed down through generations, of grandparents lost, of trauma that shaped entire communities. Those who survived carried guilt. Why did they live when so many perished? These psychological scars never heal. They simply become part of a people's DNA. India's government has erected few memorials to the famine victims. The legacy of colonialism remains politically complicated, the pain too recent, the blame too clear. But Bengal's lesson echoes through time. Man-made famines still occur in Yemen, in Ethiopia, wherever policy prioritizes power over human life. The weapon changes, but the silence remains. Every famine is a choice. Every silence enables death. The question isn't whether atrocities happen, it's whether we remember them, whether we hold accountable those who could have acted but chose silence. Winston Churchill died in 1965, celebrated as one of history's greatest leaders. He never apologized for Bengal. He never acknowledged the millions who died while he looked away. 3 million ghosts haunt the gap between heroism and horror. They remind us that history is written by victors, but truth doesn't care who wins. The Bengal famine teaches us that silence is never neutral. When those in power choose not to speak, not to act, they are making a choice, one with consequences measured in millions of lives. This was not a natural disaster. This was not inevitable. This was the cost of empire, the price of silence, the proof that indifference can be as lethal as hatred. History asks us to remember not just the speeches and the victories, but the silences and the suffering. Only then can we truly understand the cost of the world we inherited. For the 3 million whose names we never learned, whose stories were never told, may their silence finally be broken.